This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Concern in DRC as runner-up presidential candidate vows to challenge election results in court. South Africa ANC leadership to launch election manifesto today. And Nigeria launches a campaign to rehabilitate victims of human trafficking. Hello and welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. Let's take a look at other top stories making headlines. In business, Tanzania's government to get a major stake in Indian telecoms firm Bharti Airtel. And in sports, Egyptian side Zamalek continues their handball dominance in Africa. All right, we begin in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the runner-up in the presidential elections, Martin Fayulu, plans to formally challenge the poll results at the Constitutional Court. Pre-election polls had forecast a landslide win for Fayulu. However, poll results announced by the country's Electoral Commission early on Thursday indicated that 55-year-old Felix Tshisekedi had won. The Roman Catholic Church has also rejected the results. However, it has not released its detailed tally. Its observers had been deployed to over 40,000 polling stations across the country. And for more on this, we are joined on the line by CGTN's Chris Ochemringa. Chris, thank you for joining us. Can you give us an update on the opposition candidate's Martin Fayulu's bid to challenge results in court? Has he presented a petition?
Well, he hasn't. We have been here at the court for the past 2 hours, and we're still waiting for Martin Fayulu to come and file his petition challenging the announcement of the Electoral Commission. He was supposed to be here at 9, but he hasn't, and there's a very heavy police presence around the court premises. They have cordoned off some of the roads because yesterday afternoon, Martin Fayulu told his supporters to accompany him to the court to challenge the results. And so the police are having none of that. They have really deployed very heavily to break up any protest or any procession to the court.
All right. Chris, thank you for your insight and analysis. That's Chris Ochemringa reporting from Kinshasa. Now, earlier on, we spoke to Ben Shepherd, a consulting fellow at the Chatham House in London, about how challenging it would be for Martin Fayulu to definitively prove that the polls were rigged. Let's take a look at that.
Given the logistical challenge of holding elections in a country like DRC and the criticism that the government had faced for its preparations, I think most people were relatively pleasantly surprised by how things went. Obviously, the key question on election night was what would happen when results were announced, and I think that's where more questions have been asked since the surprise announcement of Felix Tshisekedi as the presumptive president of DRC. You will have heard the doubts expressed by the Catholic Church over the probity of the result as announced. They had 40,000 observers in the field. The major international bodies that one would normally expect to observe an election like this, the Carter Center and the EU, were not invited to observe. So we don't have any other baseline really apart from that that's being expressed by the Church and to some extent by Martin Fayulu, the candidate who seems to have lost out thus far, who's saying that his count, the count from his activists, also doesn't match with the official result. That's been echoed by statements from major international community players too.
In the meantime, the United Nations Security Council has met to address key issues and controversies surrounding the DRC election. Our UN correspondent Richard Nta reports from New York.
While the elections in the Democratic Republic of Congo may have occurred relatively smoothly, tensions and disputes in the wake of the official polling results are threatening to disrupt the transition of power, drawing concerns from the UN Security Council. At the Security Council meeting on Friday to discuss the election results, Leila Zerugi, the UN envoy to the DRC and head of the UN's DRC mission MONUSCO, said the polls appear to have occurred correctly despite technical, logistical and security problems. However,
regrettably, serious security incidents were noted in several locations, most concerningly in Kwilu province. Violent protests have reportedly left at least 12 dead.
The election results from the DRC's Electoral Commission CENI have led to disputes and protests, with runner-up Martin Fayulu alleging electoral fraud, demanding a recount and seeking an appeal with the Constitutional Court. CENI's results were also contested by the influential Catholic Bishops' National Episcopal Conference known as CENCO, which said the outcome contradicted its own findings.
While looking into the results and tallying them with its own monitoring, CENCO arrived at the conclusion that the results of the presidential election as published by CENI do not match the data collected by CENCO's own observation mission data that was collected in the polling and counting stations.
The observers are not assigned to compile data, and the observers are not qualified to secure the numbers from the voting office or the various registries from the political parties. Did the observation mission CENCO conduct themselves as witnesses or political parties? I should like to know which party they worked for.
Security Council members Belgium and France have also cast doubt over the results, and China reminded members that the elections is a DRC-owned affair and the country's sovereignty and territorial integrity must be respected.
Il nous semble important d'exhorter nos partenaires et les pays amis.
It is important for us to urge partners and friendly countries not to add fuel to the fire with this result, rather to endeavour to build democracy and peace by encouraging all political stakeholders and their supporters to exercise restraint.
Beyond the political and security challenges unfolding in a post-election DRC, another area of concern is the acute humanitarian crisis gripping the country, where 12.8 million people face food insecurity. Many here hope a peaceful political transition can help alleviate the crisis. Richard Nta, CGTN, New York.
Well, I guess this next story can be considered good news coming out of the Democratic Republic of Congo. A 5-day-old baby has stunned medical staff after she was born free of Ebola in Beni, a troubled city where rebel attacks have threatened health workers' attempts to contain the outbreak. She is the first child born to an Ebola survivor. Let's take a look at that.
Baby Silvana was born at an Ebola treatment center in Beni. Her mother, 28-year-old Josephine Ekoli, is overwhelmed. She is an Ebola survivor.
You have to be careful. I had a good birth. I thank God for allowing me to have a safe birth. Now I recovered. I do not have any diseases and the baby was born healthy. I'm very grateful for the great work that the team is doing.
Ekoli was infected with the virus and admitted to the treatment center last December. Historically, there have been very low survival rates for pregnant women infected with Ebola and for their babies.
I knew that they were following some women who appeared to be survivors of Ebola who were still carrying a healthy pregnancy. This was something that was close to unheard of in the last epidemic. And so that was really something exciting to see a woman give birth to a child after it appears that she survived Ebola.
Babies born to mothers with Ebola are in most cases already infected with the virus. These infants almost always die.
We did a sample on the newborn. We took a sample from the woman who gave birth and we took a sample in the amniotic fluid, which made us fear a process of release of the virus. And after PCR lab testing, actually the result came back negative.
In this outbreak, however, there have been several survivors. Doctors will continue to monitor Silvana and her mother's health to ensure they both stay well and Ebola-free. Jin Kyo, CGTN.
South Africa has completed its first full week on the United Nations Security Council. It's one of 5 new countries to assume its seat as a non-permanent member for a 2-year term. This is the 3rd time South Africa has served on the world body since the end of apartheid in 1994. The government says it's determined to focus on African conflicts, defending human rights, and protecting women and children. Here is CGTN's Nick Harper reporting from New York.
After a 6-year absence, South Africa's flag is once again flying at the United Nations Security Council. The Israeli-Palestinian issue, the nuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, and the Syria and Yemen conflicts continue to dominate the Security Council's agenda. But South Africa begins its latest tenure with the aim of silencing the guns closer to home.
I think we spend more time on the African continent. There are so many hotbeds of tension in the continent, so many conflicts in the continent. And South African priority is to make sure that we find early solutions to this conflict.
But intervention on the continent may be a diplomatic challenge for South Africa. In 2011, it faced criticism for supporting a UN resolution authorizing military action against former Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi's forces in the country. South Africa has long been part of a chorus of nations pushing for Security Council reform. Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa is proposing granting the African continent at least 2 permanent seats and an expanded council of up to 26 members. But reform would need approval from the permanent 5 members. And John Hirsch, America's Consul General to South Africa in the early 1990s, doubts that'll happen.
There's also a question in my mind about whether what's called reform will really make it work better. So if you have 15 members of the council now, if you up that to 21 or 26, will the council work more effectively? That's an open question, it seems to me.
South Africa also wants to strengthen the UN's relationship with the African Union and provide extra funding for the African Union's Peace Fund to support operations on the continent. But a resolution was abandoned last month under threat of a US veto. With its priorities set, the hard work now begins. South Africa has just 2 years to advance its agenda in the Security Council before once again relinquishing its non-permanent seat. Nick Harper, CGTN, New York.
All right, we're just getting news from central Paris where a gas explosion has left at least 20 people injured. French media says the explosion took place in a bakery. Cars were wrecked and other buildings were damaged by the blast. Firefighters are on the scene tackling the blaze. Police have asked people to stay away from the area to allow emergency services access. Now, here are some live visuals from this gruesome scene. Once again, live visuals from Paris where a gas explosion has left at least 20 people injured. We're still not sure of the source of the explosion. More details to come. French media says the explosion took place in a bakery. All right, moving on to South Africa. Many in South Africa are waiting for the unveiling of the country's ruling party's election manifesto. President Cyril Ramaphosa's pronouncement is expected to outline a plan to unite the country, grow the economy, create jobs, and reduce inequality. This marks the start of campaigns despite faltering support, internal divisions, and a sluggish economy. A recent IPSOS survey predicted the African National Congress could garner as much as 61% of the vote in May's national and provincial elections. In South Africa's parliament, the party, which wields a majority of seats, also selects the president. The ANC has ruled since the end of apartheid 25 years ago. The party recently celebrated 107 years since it was founded. And for more on this, we are joined by Nhlanhla Suhume, a political analyst in Johannesburg. Nhlanhla, thank you for joining us. What should we expect from the manifesto in policy terms?
Well, we can expect a lot coming from the President Cyril Ramaphosa, especially underlining his commitment to land reform and more specifically the policy on land expropriation without compensation. The country will find out exactly as to how the ANC plans to roll out this particular policy, as it's been quite a hot topic, especially during its discussions leading up to this event or the launch of the manifesto. But other issues that are expected to rise up are issues around racial inequality in South Africa. Even many years after the fall of apartheid, South Africa still feels the effect of racial inequality. Poverty still remains quite high in the country. Unemployment is at highs, record highs, I must say, at just 27% last year. So the president will be hoping to kind of drum up support and tell a new story about what the ANC is right now.
All right, now, given the controversy surrounding President Jacob Zuma and other issues of party unity, is this manifesto going to do enough to maintain the ANC's popularity, in your opinion?
Well, organizational renewal and the word that's been drummed up a lot within the ANC is that of unity. And the president has also kind of approached the former president Jacob Zuma, even seen with him at many public events to say that, you know what, the ANC is currently on a new path. It's a party that really wants to take on a new lease on life. But the ghost of former President Jacob Zuma still hangs quite largely, with many people really being suspicious of the ANC's of the ANC's plan to rid itself of corruption.
All right, Nhlanhla, let's backtrack a little bit. Many in South Africa will expect clarity on what the ANC will do to boost economic growth. Can you talk about some of the priority areas as well?
Look, with a country with a country whose economy is growing at less than 3%, more specifically, the country's economy grew by 0.7%. These are numbers that the president would want to see change. He would want to help invite more investment into the country. He is on quite an intense drive to bolster the country's economy and attract investment worth as much as 100 billion rand over a period of 5 years. The president is also hoping that his government, or the ANC-led government, will be the one that's at the forefront of creating jobs for many South Africans, more specifically the country's youth, many of whom in their millions being unemployed in the country. So yes, the ANC is a party that plans to change its image, for lack of a better term.
All right, Nhlanhla Suhume reporting from Johannesburg. Thank you for your insight and analysis. Time now for a short break. When we return, Zimbabwe's President Mnangagwa is set to meet Russian President Putin as he embarks on foreign tour. And Nigeria launches a campaign to rehabilitate victims of human trafficking.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. My home country lies at the foot of Africa, the southernmost tip of our beautiful continent and the unique point at which two great oceans meet. Now on a clear day in Cape Town, you can just make out Robben Island, the place where Nelson Mandela was jailed for so long. South Africa has changed so much in the years since then, but it is this country's history that shaped me and took me into reporting. I'm inspired by Africa's men and women of courage. It's the everyday hero who brings out my passion. The creatives, the decision makers, the risk takers who are shaping a bright African future. I see them in Cape Town. I see them in the pulsating city of Johannesburg. I see them across the continent, and I know our time has come.
CGTN is a platform where African voices can speak for themselves and take their stories to the world. My name is Lindy Mtongana, and I'm a news anchor and reporter for CGTN.
Welcome back. Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa will embark on a 5-country tour next week. He is seeking support for his financially distressed country. Mnangagwa will visit Russia, Belarus, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan before heading to Davos for the World Economic Forum.
The tour is the latest leg of an international re-engagement from which the country can expect a bounty of mega deals and MOUs, according to the presidential spokesperson quoted in state media this week. But citizens who are bearing the brunt of severe shortages of cash and fuel say the president shouldn't leave while the country is in the throes of its worst economic crisis in a decade.
Even if you can go all over the world, no, nothing is going to happen here. Because we've heard these stories for several years now.
There are also concerns about the financial strain on a country meant to be under austerity. During this tour, the president will clock his 26th foreign visit since taking office 14 months ago.
Mnangagwa is solving problems in an upside-down version. Our problems are local; they are not international. He has been accepted. His legitimacy is not being questioned globally. So we don't need to be spending more money going outside looking for direct investment.
But others have defended the visits, arguing that the expected dividends justify the cost.
He's the head of state, and these things we need money right now, more than anything else in the country. We need foreign direct investment, and the only way we can get them is to go out there and source them. We can't get them while we are here and just sitting and looking at our situation.
Apart from investment, Zimbabwe is also looking for a financial bailout to help ease a currency crunch as well as repay arrears to international lenders. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
One of China's fellow developing countries, Sierra Leone, gets the ball rolling on Belt and Road Cooperation for 2019. A country that has battled poverty and disease has done so with China's help, and now its foreign minister has visited to talk about the future. Here is CGTN's Su Yuting with more.
The first visit by a foreign minister to China in the new year comes as Sierra Leone's Ali Kaba descends on Beijing. Chinese State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi welcomed Kaba at the Diaoyutai State Guest House on Friday. Wang Yi said last year Sierra Leone President Bill paid a state visit to China and attended the FOCAC Beijing summit, charting the course for the future development of bilateral relations. Wang Yi recalled 5 years ago, at the height of West Africa's Ebola outbreak, China decisively extended a helping hand and stood by Sierra Leone people, winning the battle against the Ebola disease. The two ministers told the press that since their countries are developing nations, it's important to maintain their Belt and Road synergy. They also agreed that adhering to the 8 initiatives of the Beijing FOCAC summit would ensure that their cooperation is practical and mutually beneficial and will deliver more benefits to both peoples.
It is the responsibility of China and Africa and China and other developing countries to make the international governance system more fair and reasonable. What we're following is a path of just cause, and we have the support of all developing countries and people.
Foreign Minister Kaba says Sierra Leone appreciates China's help and is willing to learn from China's experience in governance.
President Julius Maada Bio has stated that our focus should be on the poverty reduction strategy, which is the heart of our new direction, and highlighting education and fisheries and agriculture, infrastructure. Those are the ways to deepen the people-to-people appreciation and exchange. And I look forward to more effort in this area to implement the 8 priorities of the Beijing forecast.
This year marks the 48th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between China and Sierra Leone. Both sides expressed the hope that the two countries will strengthen cooperation in various areas, including trade, investment and healthcare, in order to improve their bilateral relations. Su Yuting, CGTN, Beijing.
Authorities in Moscow have responded to claims that a shadowy Russian military outfit are linked to the killing of 3 Russian journalists in the Central African Republic. The reporters were shot dead while filming a documentary about Russian interest in Africa. Their organization suspects foul play, but Russian authorities say they believe it was a random robbery. Dan Ashby has the latest.
So here's what we know. 3 Russian journalists were in the Central African Republic in July last year, and they were there to shoot a documentary about a private Russian military outfit. They were then all shot dead during an ambush on their car. Now, from here on in, there are 2 different perspectives. The first, from the man who was funding the journalists. He has commissioned his own report, and he is a prominent critic of President Putin. His reporters linked the murders to the very group that the journalists were investigating. That group is called Wagner. It is, as I say, this private military group, and it is believed to be run by an associate of President Putin. Now, this report found that the journalist driver had actually been compromised by Wagner, and that driver was relaying the journalists' whereabouts to soldiers. We also now have Russian authorities publishing their findings. They say there is no cause for suspicion around this driver, that he was just a random person, and that actually what happened was a random robbery. They also stress that the journalists had been advised that they were going into a very dangerous area. They were advised not to go in, but they decided to do so anyway. So we have these 2 different accounts, no consensus, but this will continue to make headlines in Russia, not least because in the last 20 years, 25 Russian journalists have been murdered. Dan Ashby, CGTN, Moscow.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has arrived in Abu Dhabi on the latest stop of his tour to reassure Washington's Middle East allies of its commitment to the region. Earlier on Friday in the Egyptian capital, he met President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and other officials and announced U.S. foreign policy in the Arab world. Here is Adel El-Marouki with more.
Following Trump's decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has been touring the Arab world. Some Arab nations feared the move could increase Iran's influence in the region. Pompeo came to comfort these concerns.
I believe he's here for a far more important message than comfort. Pompeo is drawing the new U.S. foreign policy in the region throughout the coming years. In Cairo, he's discussing many crucial issues for the region, among them Egypt's role in the Syria post the U.S. troops withdrawal. There is a suggestion to replace them with a kind of an Arab force. In addition, they will be discussing another draft of the Palestinian crisis, so-called the deal of the century.
Pompeo has met with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the Chief of General Intelligence Abbas Kamel, and Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry. The talks were mainly concerned about security threats in the region. Both parties have renewed their commitment to deepen their older partnership in facing these challenges. After meeting the Egyptian president, Pompeo has announced the U.S. foreign policy to the Middle East for the coming years. He reassured his Arab allies that the United States will keep backing them. But his speech lacked details about how this vision will be implemented. The U.S. Secretary of State stressed that Trump's administration has had a positive impact in the Arab world.
99% of the territory ISIS once held is liberated. Life is returning to normal for millions of Iraqis and Syrians. Of course, our work together is not finished. It's almost never America's work alone. Our aim is to partner with our friends and vigorously oppose our enemies because a strong, secure, and economically vibrant Middle East is in our national interest.
Pompeo confirmed that the U.S. will work with its allies to retreat Iran's influence in the region, primarily citing its threats against Israel. Yet he didn't tackle other major Arab conflicts.
Arab leaders in particular are worried about security issues, be that extremism, Daesh, ISIS, and so on, or be that the Iranian hegemony. So in that sense, it's a positive message. The issue is, how are you going to actually help if you're going to withdraw? And secondly, okay, there are other issues in the Middle East as well, which need to be resolved. The Arab-Israeli conflict has been going on for over 70 years.
It's the first visit for Mike Pompeo to Cairo since Trump appointed him Secretary of State. He will continue his Middle East tour in the Gulf until January 15. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
To fly to Bahrain and then the United Arab Emirates. He's expected to call for increased pressure on Iran and push for unity among Gulf neighbors still embroiled in a festering dispute with Qatar. He'll also be promoting a U.S.-backed initiative to form what some call an Arab NATO that would bring the region together in a military alliance to counter threats from Iran. Now to human trafficking, and Nigeria is one of the worst affected countries in Africa. This includes cross-border and internal trafficking. There's now a campaign in the country to rehabilitate victims. Phil Ihaza tells us more on the story.
33-year-old Oliver Nwodo is a victim of human trafficking. In search of a better life abroad as a teenager, he left Abuja 15 years ago. But he was deceived by a travel agent. After almost a year traveling by road through the Sahara Desert, he only made it halfway to his destination of Italy before returning home.
I embarked on this quest to get to Europe. But on getting to Libya by road, I found out that the journey wasn't what I bargained for. Most of my friends lost their lives. Some were buried there in the desert. But miraculously, somehow, I was able to return home. And here I am, and I encountered this NGO. And I was able to learn through this NGO. I was able to be a graphic artist. And today, I thank God for my life.
The NGO, Society for the Reconciliation of Nigerians in the Diaspora, runs this center where many other returnees who are also victims of human trafficking get support to recover from their trauma. They are taught professional skills like bead making, catering and tailoring as a way to empower and reintegrate them into the society. The founder, a retired Nigerian senior diplomat, says his experience while serving abroad for 3 decades birthed this dream.
A lot of Nigerians are being repatriated from all over the world. And when they come back to Nigeria, they are not given a soft landing. Many of them are just rushed back to the villages where they come from, and they find their way back to the countries where they come from. And so I decided, from my experience, to rally around this organization called Serenade. We teach them skills, very basic skills, so they can start their lives without necessarily going back to where they come from.
According to the International Organization of Migration, about 11,000 Nigerians, mainly women, are trafficked outside of the country yearly for prostitution and slavery. Nigeria's anti-trafficking body, the National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons, insists it's doing everything it can.
One thing that we've done was to make sure that anti-trafficking issues are incorporated into the curriculum for primary and post-primary schools in Nigeria, to make sure that it's deepened, it's sustained, and those things are learned. It becomes a learned behavior for young persons not to imagine that the street of Europe is paved with gold.
In addition, NAPTIP says it has convicted 365 human traffickers since its inception in 2003, with many others currently under prosecution. Although the government is making efforts to tackle human trafficking in the country, analysts say more needs to be done to improve some of the major factors that increase vulnerability to trafficking, things like insecurity, poverty, unemployment and corruption. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
And you're watching Africa Live on CGTN. We have a whole lot more news coming your way. Here's a look at what's ahead. Tanzanian government to get a major stake in Indian telecoms firm Bharti Airtel. And the World Bank warns privatization of Ethiopian state enterprises is not happening anytime soon.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in. Business in Africa is high risk. After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back. Let's start off in Tanzania. The Indian telecoms firm Bharti Airtel has agreed to give 9% of its stake in its local subsidiary to the country's government. This will raise the government's share of Airtel Tanzania to 49% from 40%. The agreement follows a meeting between President John Magufuli and Bharti Airtel chairman Sunil Mittal. The talks were aimed at resolving a long-running dispute over ownership of the company. At least 18 million shares will change hands in this deal, but their monetary value has not been announced. A statement from the government says Bharti Airtel will own 51% of the business once this deal is completed. 8 member countries of the West African Economic and Monetary Union met this week in Burkina Faso's capital, Ouagadougou. The countries are celebrating the institution's 25th anniversary under the theme 25 Years of Progress Towards Regional Integration, working together to meet the challenge of the free movement of people and goods. The leaders from Burkina Faso and Cote d'Ivoire were some of the guests attending the gathering. President Alassane Ouattara has stressed the importance of the West African Monetary Union. Despite significant progress, the body is facing challenges including security, sustainable development, youth employment, and climate change. Well, the World Bank has warned that privatization of the state-owned enterprises in Ethiopia won't be happening anytime soon, and that's because there's a lack of regulation in place to support a private sector. Last April, the country's prime minister decided to privatize some SOEs which have enjoyed a monopoly for decades. These include the national carrier Ethiopian Airlines and the country's only telecom company. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi filed this report from Addis Ababa.
Captain Abera Lemi is the owner of National Airlines, a private airline company that has operated in Ethiopia for over 7 years. But the airline's growth has been limited by the domination of Ethiopia's national carrier, Ethiopian Airlines.
We have a stakeholders meeting in this country. So we always take Kenya as an example. We always talk, everybody's talking about that. Why don't you go to Kenya and look how the private airline operating there? So that freedom, as long as you operate rights, you've got freedom to fly any type of aircrafts. The fact that we are only limited to operate 50-seater aircrafts, that's also one of the challenge.
Ethiopian Airlines has decried the push to privatization from Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, but its small competitors await eagerly for privatization so they can have a chance to expand their profits.
Here, with all these populations, even if you create like 10 big airlines like Ethiopian Airlines, I'm sure there will still be a market for all of us. So that's true. Up to now, it's only one airline, but from now on, maybe not. Not maybe, it will not be only one airline.
Privatization will also include the country's only telecommunication company, Ethio Telecom. The World Bank, now advising the government on how to privatize, says the advantages could be huge.
Partial privatization is fine, but you'll get the full benefits of it if there's also competition. That's what will bring benefits to the economy in terms of, for example, in telecom, a quick spread of services, a sharp reduction in prices, I think the government's intention is to move in this direction.
The reforms are still in a technical stage under a privatization committee led by the Ministry of Finance. And the World Bank says privatization is still a long way away. Values still need to be determined for the state-owned enterprises, and the road to transitioning them to shareholders still needs to be mapped out. But already foreign companies are eyeing the lucrative stakes in Ethiopia's state monopolies. South Africa's telecommunication company MTN and Vodafone have reportedly expressed interest. The Ethiopian government is looking at cashing in big through the sale of shares of its selected state companies, and at the same time ease foreign currency shortages and reduce the weaknesses in market connectivity. But it is also careful to set strong policies in order to protect the reforms from backfiring. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
The African Union says it is on track to issue a new African passport to promote trade and free movement of people within the continent. The Commission said the issuance of this document is its top priority for 2019. CGTN Jerome Chala has the details.
The details of the new passport are set to be revealed at the African Union's forthcoming summit. But according to officials, the continent is working to achieve the plan starting from this year. And the travel document will have huge benefits to Africans.
To free the economic space, to institutionalize political relations between neighboring countries, sharing costs, realizing how close you are as brothers, for instance, Ethiopia and Eritrea. The sudden easing of the tensions has increased business. Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, for instance. Between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, together, they have about 80% of the world cocoa production. If they operate together, they can affect the price. They can decide together to have factories along those borders, and then people who have been on various other sites will begin to operate together and recognize and re-achieve the integrity which eluded them for years. They are now beginning to recognize their very common Africanness. So there are changes taking place, and I think it's for the better.
Officials at the African Union believe the passport will address the decades-old problems which emanate from the 1984 Berlin Conference that created the African borders.
Those borders which cut across families, ethnic groups without consideration, without consultation, are still with us. And those borders mark the origin of the African state. The African state as it is today is along the lines of the borders drawn up in 1884-85. So the reason that the business of African Union really reduced to brass tacks is trying to disentangle those knots that we're tied into.
The AU started a partial rollout of the Africa passport in July 2016. Back then, priority was given to heads of state and ministers. As of June 2018, the passport was planned to be rolled out and ready for use at borders worldwide by 2020. So now the AU says further details on the design, production and issuance of the new Africa passport will be unveiled at the 32nd summit of the AU in February here in Addis Ababa. If and when implemented on time, the step aims to unify all Africans and encourage their movement within the continent, as well as empowering countries with weak passports. Jerome Chala, CGTN at the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa.
Nigeria's Niger Delta region is not only known for its oil, it is also perceived as a very volatile region. But a dance drama group is seeking to change that perception. The group is also on a bold mission to show that the American tap dance has its roots in the Niger Delta region of Nigeria. Here is CGTN's Deji Badmus with this story.
It's called the Seki dance, a dance drama indigenous to the people of Nigeria's oil-rich Delta region. But Seki is more than just dance and drama. It's the creation of popular Nigerian entertainer and playwright Yibo Koko, a man on a mission with Seki.
Seki is an agreement of various masquerade, traditional cultural dances of the core Niger Delta. And we're telling the world that the American tap dance evolved from the core Niger Delta. If you go to the history of the tap dance, you see that the metal found underneath the soles of the shoes is what makes the same rhythm as you get from the rattles or igbiri you get within the ankles of the masquerades tied down. Same applies to the Owembe dance. They use the knife to get exactly the same rhythm you get underneath the soles of the shoes, but in a complement to the rattles they have on their ankles. So it's a systematic approach to showing that what you see from America as a tip of the original dances that have come out from this area. So we're saying that if the tap dance was a copycat, these are the varieties of the type of dances that accompany the tap as you know it in America. But here it's called Owembe. Here it is a way of life.
Beyond making a global statement on the origin of the tap dance, Yibo and his cast and crew are also using Seki to promote the rich and positive culture of the Niger Delta people and push out a different narrative about a region that has often been portrayed as unwelcoming and volatile. One unique thing about Seki is that it is not just one dance. It's a combination of a variety of traditional dances of the indigenous people.
So we have Pioru, we have Oguen, we have Pambowu, we have the Ojongowu, we also have the Owembe masquerade group. So all of them form Seki dance drama, but they're all part of the Niger Delta, but particularly River State. Seki has the eye candy. It's colorful. It's better not to say something wrong. It's enticing, it's sexy, it's really cool to dance. So if you tell our younger ones, we show them, and they become, we want them to love it so much so that we don't need government, we don't need the traditional leaders, heads, but the individuals are itching, interested, so that the nostalgic feeling of being a parent or having passed through this before would allow for you to say, yeah, let's do this. I want to do this. I'm interested in doing this. So the interest is what we're trying to build.
Yibo and his group have toured Nigeria with Seki, and they now plan to take it to the global stage. They have begun a crowdfunding campaign to raise $3 million to achieve that. They're still way off their target, but they're not giving up on their quest to take this rich cultural heritage across the world. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
All right, we've got your sports news coming up after the break. Let's take a sneak peek at the headline. All right, we'll tell you of how Egyptian side Zamalek has continued their handball dominance in Africa.
Africa, where champions are made,
records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way. Match Point, only on CGTN.
Welcome back. Let's talk a bit of tennis. Andy Murray may retire after the Australian Open with severe pain from his troublesome right hip having become almost unbearable for him to play on. Well, he was overcome with emotion